Okay, this video is going to cover looking at this opening strophe by Walt Whitman. And I'm going to put onto Moodle for today as well. The content that I want you to look at is going to have a PDF that's going to go through my explanation of how I would close read really the title and the first stanza. Remember that this is a stanza, okay? And this is a strophe, right? Which is to say like a section of a longer poem, all right? It's another way to talk about that. We could use the word section as well, completely fine. We just want to be consistent whenever we're writing about it and we're discussing it. So I'm going to use as consistently as I can the word strophe. So in that PDF I'll put up, I'm going to discuss a number of different things. I've already talked about it a little bit in the introductory video about the stanzas and how it kind of looks, and I've gone through that. So now I want to talk a little bit more about content, language, and some of the imagery that he uses. So he begins by saying, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf with my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check, with original energy. Okay. So we could talk about so much inside of this poem, and people have, and I have, but I'm not going to. I'm going to try to see how I would approach this if this was a new poem for me. So the first thing I want to do is just give across my initial impressions about what I had. Then I'm going to go back and look at something more specific. We always want to move towards specificity, right? Specificity is what we want. Summary is fine. We need it to get into specificity, but specificity is what we want. So I'm going to try to show you that. But generally what I see in this, if I go stanza by stanza, right, he's kind of building up into an argument with this. So this opening stanza is telling me that we're going to hear from the very beginning, I celebrate myself and sing myself. So again, song of myself makes sense. He's going to use celebration and he's going to sing. This still kind of leans maybe toward a selfish experience, but I don't know that for sure because I have a comma at the end of the line, which tells me there's more to come. So I'm going to see what else he has to say. So, but the word celebrate right now really stands out to me. It's the second word, right? I'm going to write it down because it feels important. It's a very specific way to talk about language, to talk about what that means. So, pardon me. I celebrate myself and sing myself. And what I assume you shall assume. And that moves us away, doesn't it? We have this addition of the second person in there, of the you, right? So I assume what you shall assume. So not only now is he talking about a second person, a you, he's talking about the assumptions that a you brings into this. So we have to ask a number of questions here, like who is this you? And what are these assumptions? And what is he assuming that I'm going to assume, right? And this is a lot, this is a complicated idea. So he tries to explain the next line, but again, there's a comma there, right? At the end of the line, I don't know why I'm pointing at it. There's another comma here. So again, he's telling me there's more happening. So one of the things I'm just gonna write down now is the poem's use of commas. They seem really important. He's adding to his sentences as he goes forward. So, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. That changes it. That changes it a lot. Because he's making a very specific kind of scientific argument here, and doing so in the 19th century, which is interesting. But he's saying that as I sing myself, as I celebrate myself, and I assume what you assume, right? Because whatever I have, the atoms, the atomic nature of myself, that which is most essential, that which is the most, at this point in time, especially in thinking, was that the most unsplittable part of reality was the atom. And of course, now we understand with quantum physics that there are maybe not even atoms anymore. I don't really know. I haven't kept up with it. But I mean, the idea is that thinking about it as like this most localized part of your identity, that you are atomically identical. Okay, we are all atomically identical. And he's saying that what I have, my atoms that belong to me, they belong to you as well, which is true, right? I mean, we are, as Carl Sagan famously said, we are stardust. We are made of the things of stars, carbon and hydrogen, right? This is what makes us. And what I have, you have as well. So in this interesting way, he's saying that as I sing myself, right, as I celebrate what I am inherently, I am explicitly and implicitly singing for you as well, because we share the exact same makeup. At an atomic level, we don't look any different. We're not any different. I mean, if you watch the entire Avengers trilogy, or trilogy, what is it, like a quadrilogy? It doesn't matter. But if you watched all of that, right, like the whole point at the end, right, Thanos is talking about, total spoiler alert here, Thanos is talking about breaking the whole universe down to its atomic level and starting again. And why? Because everything at the atomic level is identical. It doesn't really matter. So interestingly, his argument in this opening stanza is to think of, yes, I'll be singing about myself, but in doing so, I'm singing about you. And I think in this space, in the you, he is talking about like me, right? The person reading this particular poem, and then you who are also reading along. So if I think about image here, right, the image that really stands out to me, the thing that's in here that has some sort of sensory experience is the atom. So the very first thing he wants me to see, besides the self, right, which is also an image, is the atom. So that's something to think about, how the smallest possible things can really matter, right? So that's something that's really interesting. And if I'm writing about this particular poem, then that's something I want to think about. How is he using small things? Why do small things matter so much when it comes to the self, right? And as this poem goes forward, so the first stanza is saying, we are connected, right? You're connected on an atomic level. So no matter how much I talk about myself, when I do so, I'm also talking about you, okay? Fundamentally, maybe not in our day-to-day lives, but basically saying we breathe, we experience, we have consciousness. We are the same in these spaces. So the second stanza, he says, and I loaf and invite my soul, I lean and look at my ease, observing a sphere of summer grass. So, you know, we can talk about a number of different things. When I read this, the first word that really jumps out to me is the word soul, right? So this again goes to, like, if we think about the atomic level, right, is this sort of scientific, you know, chemist kind of explanation of the self, right? This is the atomic part of us. And then the next thing he mentions is the soul, which is the more metaphysical part of us, right? That which is connected to what we think about with religion, what we think about with identity is a more complicated idea, that there is this intrinsic spiritual self that we call the soul. So we go from the atom to the soul. So he wants me to keep paying attention to the smallest, most complete parts of myself. And then, of course, we see this summer grass. So he's going to lay in the grass and just kind of be lazy, right? So basically he's saying, I'm going to be lazy, right? And I'm going to invite my soul to be lazy with me. And it's going to, he doesn't use the word lazy. He says lean and loaf, right? So loaf is an interesting word. It's, you know, we want to look that up in terms of its historical connotation. But if somebody's loafing about, we typically think of them as not really getting much done. And we're a pragmatic culture. So people who are loafing are lazy people. These people who are lazy are unproductive. Unproductive people, we typically want to be like, you know, go do something productive. And he's saying, nah, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to relax. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to look at this grass. He's going to slow everything down, okay? Keep everything in pace, right? Still singing about himself, but doing so in this particular prone position. And then he moves back, right? Now we have our third stanza. He says, my tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. So this is a really different stanza to me. First of all, it's the longest one. It's a 4-line stanza, also known as a quatrain, but it's a 4-line stanza. I could go through a number of different things with this one, but what I want to point out mainly is he's gone from like atom to soul to grass, now to his tongue. All right. So why is he talking about his tongue? Well, it's a song. So we're going to use our tongues. That's going to be a part of the process. Also, when we think about like metonymy, where one thing stands for something larger, our tongue is very much connected to speech, and speech is connected to the way that we understand ourselves, right? So the tongue, the first thing, and all the atoms of his blood, which are innumerable, right, are formed from the soil and the air. So he tons of images in this first line, right? Way more than we've seen so far in the poem. He's saying tongue, atom, blood, soil, air. And he's saying all these things are connected because he was born from parents, right, who were born from parents and were born from parents, all from this part of the world. So he's creating a lineage, right? If you've ever read or you're familiar at all with the story of Genesis, it does the same thing, right? And this is a really old trope in literature where we connect back and we say, hey, we have a right to speak here because if you look at my lineage, right, it goes all the way back to here. It's the very nature of the aristocracy of England, right? So how far do I connect back to Charlemagne? And from the bloodline, what is my right to own land? But he's saying that, you know, I'm going to talk about this because I'm from here. This is my home, right? This is what it is for me to have a home, and a home that I understand. And he's 37 years old, so he gives us his age. And I mean, we can talk about that in any number of ways, right? Why give us that? Why do we need that? Do we need that? What does 37 have to do with anything? Is it a symbol? And I don't really think so. I think he's just saying, look, I'm a little older. I've spent some time on the planet. I'm not, and that doesn't mean that, I know anything. It just means that I've been here a little bit longer. I've had more questions that I can answer, perhaps, right? Or more questions that I can pose, at least. And he's saying I'm in good health, right? So I'm in a good place, and I'm not ceasing, right? I'm gonna continue doing this until I die. Okay, that's just what I'm gonna try and do. I'm going to be a part of this world, hoping to cease not till death. Okay, so I'm going to work forward on this one. I'm going to sing myself, and then I'm going to die. And I hope not to stop singing until that moment. And that's a very bold thing, right? To celebrate everything all the time, constantly, until we die. That's a lot. That's a big question to ask. So that's his stance right now, all right? Kind of big deals. He's already bringing death and souls and atoms and his parents and his age and health and celebration. I mean, he's brought in a ton. His tongue, right? There's like in there too. And then he moves into his last stanza here at the opening. So this is the last thing he really wants us to know before we enter into the poem. And he says, creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check with original energy. So the first two things here, creeds and schools, okay? So what's a creed? Well, it's the last installment of the Rocky series, but it's also about having a creed is having a way to live your life, right? Like a motto, okay? A way, like, here's how I approach reality. Here's my creed, okay? And that could be whatever, right? You name it. But that's a way that we live our lives. It's a way to see the world through a certain lens. And by doing anything, when we create a lens to see the world with, we inherently, we have to narrow out, right, the rest of the spaces, because we're saying, no, I travel through the world with this one idea, okay? Not that you have just one, but it's plural, it's creed, it's not creed. So he's saying, that's one way to like sift through the whole universe, right? This is my approach. And a school is the same idea, a school of thought, right? This could be like a religious aspect. It could be also an academic understanding of things. But either way, it's another way to sort of process reality, to say that I process reality through the school of thought of whatever, Marxism or Christianity or Judaism. It's this idea of I have this reality and I follow it. And he's saying I'm putting those in abeyance. And in abeyance is this very particular word. And it's a great word to look up, but basically it's like I'm just putting them back here. All right, I'm going to put them away, right? Basically, I'm pushing pause on them. And he explains it, retiring back a while sufficed at what they are. So I'm just going to push them back there. I'm happy with what those things are. Creeds and schools are strong. They can be super helpful. I'm not going to forget them, never forgotten, right? But I'm not going to really talk about them. Okay, so don't expect to read this poem and hear a lot about like what it means to be a decent Christian man, or what I mean? That's not his point with this. He's saying, I get that they're there, but that's not what I'm going to be talking about. And I keep bringing up like Christianity specifically because it's a Puritan nation, and specifically at this point, highly Puritan nation. So at this point in time, when he's writing, I should say. So he says, I harbor for good or bad, right? So I'm going to take in either one, right? I'm not going to just make these distinctions, some more moral complications. I'm going to talk about everything, that which is good. I'm going to be a harbor for that. I'm going to let it come into me. I will receive it. Remember, he's laying on the ground now. He's saying, no, I'm going to take it all in. I'm not going to be specific about what I accept. I'm going to accept everything, right? And I permit to speak at every hazard. So I'm going to talk about no matter what. So he's saying, like, look, you're probably going to hear some stuff that's going to disrupt your comfort, and I'm okay with that, right? And that's what I'm going to do. And then he ends with this nature without check with original energy, which is a bold line. And that there's a lot of history behind that line, right? We think about the Puritan culture. It was not a nature-based culture. They really wanted to tame it. They wanted it to like be under their control. And he's saying, no. I want to be purely natural, originally full of energy. Right. So he's saying, like, again, you're about to experience the full self. In a way that we can think about this might be like an unfiltered self, a way that we'd use it in our contemporary language. He's not going to put a filter on. If he has an idea, he's going to say it. And and even if it's like a bad idea, he's going to explore it, because it turns out that good and bad, right, they exist within us. They are all part of what we are. We can't pretend that we're, always good. We have these other thoughts that occur. And he's saying, I'm not going to ignore those thoughts. I'm going to go into those thoughts. And sometimes and in this poem, if you read the whole thing, which at some point in your life, I hope you do, he's going to talk about things like the slave trade. He's going to talk about the problematic nature of the way we approach human beings and women. He's going to talk about how we approach the indigenous population, how we approach, which at this point in time, not that nobody was saying that, it's just that it wasn't considered to be good poetry, right? So he's saying, no, I'm going to talk about all this stuff, and I'm going to do it with original energy. Nobody's going to check. I'm not putting a check on any of this. I'm going as hard as I can at it, and I'm going to do this until I feel like I've explained or I've sung enough about it that maybe you and I have a way to connect, okay? So this opening strophe is about introduction. It's saying, the argument is saying, like, I'm going to talk about it. Whatever it is that's on my mind, I'm going to talk about it, good or bad. I'm going to put all of my energy into it. And so he's letting you know that that's the reality of this one. And if you look at the imagery, right, of the way that this goes from, it starts with the self, right, and it ends with energy. Okay, and in the middle of this, we have, the soul and atoms and blood and parents, health and death and creeds and schools. So he's kind of like bookmarking all of what we think of as reality with these two ideas, right? The self, right? He starts with the I, the first person pronoun, and he ends with energy, right? I, energy. And he's going to say, like, look, all of this is what I'm going to try to cover. And so it's a pretty bold beginning. And a lot of this is just understanding the poem in its bits and pieces, okay? So that's what you're going to be trying to do, is talking your way through what his poems are saying, why he might try to say this, and what we can gather from that one. And that's strophe 1 of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. And to be very clear, we covered some of it, right? And there are probably still a lot of questions. And if you have those questions, please email them to me, and we'll see if we can't answer those during office hours or during tomorrow's video. But that's the opening strophe. Thank you.